Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and empowers you to live a more vibrant second half. If you find us on YouTube, please remember to subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss any more conversations. If you're on a podcast platform, please subscribe, rate, and share this podcast so more people can be empowered by these conversations. Today, friends, we're going to be having a conversation that I am quite passionate about. We're going to be talking about emotional contagion, and my guest is going to teach us how to handle our emotions in society and in politics, how to have emotionally aware conversations, how to compromise and develop constructive relationships, and prevent negative and toxic emotions from overtaking us, from getting caught up in emotional contagion. My guest today is Dr. Bruce Hutchison. He is a retired clinical psychologist, and he is the author of Emotions Don't Think: Emotional Contagion in a Time of Turmoil. Bruce, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for inviting me. That's great, Gina.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I'm really interested, Bruce, what is it that led to this mission, this message, writing this particular book?
Well, I've been concerned about the direction of society for decades, and I'm also aware that, emotions have been running rampant in the last 20, 30 years or so, especially even more in the last 5 years, whatever. And so, and it strikes me that as a psychologist, I want to say something about how to handle emotions to the general public, because in psychology, people think it applies to, which it does, to situations where there are problems, difficulties, emotional disorders, whatever you want to call it, mental illness perhaps, but there's a lot of overlap there. But yet, no books are written that I'm aware of for society in general to deal with the emotions that go on. And we see the emotions regularly in the news. And so let's talk about how to deal with them for us regular folks, right? And we're all regular folks, don't get me wrong.
I agree wholeheartedly with you that, we tend to get specific help individually, but in the last 3 years, we've been in this unusual situation as a world under the same kind of pressure at the same time and impacted by the same emotional contagion. I believe that we have had a very difficult season, and it in varying degrees of responses from different people. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about your book and what does it address?
Okay, well, my book addresses the emotions that flow through society. Now, people may not even realize this happens, but the emotions are passed on automatically. We have, mirror neurons inside our bodies, which can absorb the emotions from someone else who's near us or around us, or even through videos. And as you and I are talking, I feel your emotions, maybe you feel mine. It's stronger when you're in personal contact, of course. Now, but the emotions flow and fly high now through society at this time of turmoil. So, and we've been having turmoil in society the last number of years, and it's worsened. So, but you can't have turmoil without emotions. Right? Now, unfortunately, emotions are often ignored. Society tends to be what we call emotion phobic. They don't want to talk about it, don't want to deal with it. And yet it's there in full force. And if you don't talk about it and don't deal with it, it's going to get even worse. So we want to talk about how to deal with the emotions. And emotions are strong and they have an impact. So yeah, it's important to work on it. So in my book, I talk about, what emotional contagion is and how it applies to society, cancel culture, things like that. I'm trying to apply psychological knowledge to society around us. As it goes on, there's a chapter on the impact on society, there's a chapter on the impact on politics, and other topics, hate, things like that are important. How to deal with hate. It's so important. But if you back up and deal with it, it's going to be better. Now, at the same time, I'm not talking about any particular positions people take in life. In other words, you can make your decisions about which political party you want, which person you want to vote for, what your preferences are in life. Think of it that, in life, we're all used to having so many differences. That's what democracy is about, right? Some of us like Pepsi, some of us like Coke, some of us like tea, some of us like coffee. We don't argue about that. You might discuss it now and then, but hey, no big deal, right? So why can't politics and life be in a similar way like it used to?
Mm.
And so you can still continue with a particular position you have in life about something, but the emotion gets carried away. And that emotion grabs us and drives us so that people react to the emotion instead of the actual political or social position about it.
That's interesting that you say that, because when we're reactive, which is what you're describing, right? And when we are reactive, it literally, brain science turns off the front of your brain and you're no longer logical. And I think that's what we're talking about. If I could brain science it, I feel like you're saying we need to learn how to keep those things in balance so we can continue to think clearly in these situations.
Exactly. You get what's called amygdala arousal. The amygdala in the limbic system of the brain is controls the emotions, and so that gets hyper aroused. Instead of the prefrontal cortex being where the executive part of the brain is being in charge. It's like, let's just hand over the ruling of society from the executive branch to the emotional branch. Well, that's not going to work, but that's what's happening.
Before we hit record, I was talking through my thoughts about, when we have unfinished emotional business in our own lives, that we may be aware of or not, or we're aware and ignoring, like you said, I think that puts us in a more vulnerable position to be overtaken with emotional contagion. Because I feel like, do you believe that this is, while it's a societal problem, it's actually an individual solution? Yes. Meaning that we have to work on our own business so that we show up better in society?
Right. You can't keep expecting society, the politicians, the businesses to do things the way you think they should, because they're not going to, at least not without a lot of influence and a lot of impact from the people. So it comes down to an individual level to handle things in a more appropriate manner, because otherwise, it's not going to work. It's going to get even worse.
It's difficult for people we have so many different personalities and so many different perspectives coming into a social situation. How do we help people become more aware when they get into a situation where, you're right, we don't have control over other people, we don't have control over the situation, sometimes we don't have control over ourselves? So what are some ways that we can begin to shift toward more healthy relationship with our emotions?
Right. Well, one of the things we can do differently is to use our behavior. A lot of the emotional contagion comes when we mimic the other people. So, right. So if you're behaving in the same way somebody else behaves, you're probably going to feel their feelings. So I can take a drink when you do, then we're going to start to feel similar feelings, right?
Yes.
But if I start to ignore that, not to be rude or anything, but if we do it differently, then you're not going to have the same feelings as the person who's doing it. So you change your behavior, because a lot of emotional contagion comes from mimicking the other person. So, and so it's hard, because it means we have to kind of start to focus on things other than the actual conversation, because that's how you can change things, by being aware of your body position, not using the same phrases others use, moving in different ways as they use. And when we saw things happening politically, like in the insurrection attempt in January 6th, people were dressed the same, they were moving the same, they were doing similar actions. So there was a lot of emotional contagion flowing back and forth, left and right, center. Emotions were taking over that day, and emotions don't think, as we saw. And so, but there were some stories of people who changed their mind, who backed off, who didn't take part, who realized what was going on, but you don't read those very often. And so, unfortunately, we don't get that kind of sense from the media about people who are handling it more reasonably.
Mhm.
And that would help the people who realize they have to. How did someone decide this was the wrong thing to take part in? They had a realization, no, I don't want to go with this emotion or this crowd. I think the term groupthink is wrong. It should be group feel.
Yeah, that's really, yeah. Yes.
Right. Because otherwise, the thoughts come with the emotions. Emotions carry simple thoughts. Just like, get them. These guys are no good. They're evil. They're bad. Okay. It's simple, very simple thoughts. Incorrect thoughts. Because
overreactive thoughts.
Yeah, overreact. Exactly. Yeah.
Bruce, early in my adult life, I struggled with anger for a myriad of reasons. And the battle to overcome anger was very challenging because I had to face, and I want to funnel this into the conversation, I had to face where I had handled myself poorly, which is an unfriendly realization. Do you know what I mean? Like, I had to acknowledge that my behavior and my lack of emotional control was negatively impacting the home and the environment I wanted to create. Like, I was my own stumbling block. And so I understand that when it comes to this emotional conversation around emotions, there is a step of awareness, then personal responsibility that can be very difficult to turn and look at yourself. And maybe that inhibits some people, because if we've not been used to dealing with our emotion, turning and facing it, I do know personally that the effort it takes to not beat yourself up, to learn to acknowledge, forgive, and do better. I do think it's difficult, Bruce, when we have an emotional issue and we have to turn and face ourselves. It's very challenging because that means I have to not only become aware, but I have to be aware of the fact that I might be hurting other people. I'm hurting myself. Like, those were the realizations that were so difficult because I had to turn and face myself. Right. And it takes a lot of courage. And I wonder if people are in the habit of not wanting to deal with their emotions, but at the same time being controlled by their emotions, it's a large and courageous step, to do these things.
It takes a bit of humility.
Yeah.
And so good for you for doing that. And we all need a bit of humility to help us with this. And that's what's important, right? So taking responsibility is not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you're ill or that you're weak or anything like that. Society tends to be ultra competitive, I think, too competitive, which is part of the problem here. And instead, we can become more cooperative. And that involves a little bit of trust and acknowledging that we're human and we're not perfect. So good for you. Yeah, sometimes we can get too angry, and that can be a problem. And we go through these parts of life. And acknowledging it is important, because if you don't acknowledge it, you can't change it.
Yeah.
Right. So good for you. That's great. Yeah.
I just wonder if guilt and shame don't compound with this emotional contagion.
Okay. In what way do you think that could happen?
I wonder if, when you behave badly, something in you knows it.
Yeah.
And we could go one of two ways, or there's probably more ways, but in my mind, I'm thinking I could be like, geez, I was a jerk. Or I could justify myself.
Well, try doing neither. Okay. Don't label yourself.
There we go.
Yeah, say, well, unfortunately, I made a mistake. We're not perfect, and I'll try not to do that again. And if anyone of your audience thinks that they're perfect, I got news for you. Okay, they're not. Okay, I don't even know your audience, but no one is perfect, right?
Right.
So yeah, um, so in fact, psychologists have studied perfectionism, and it can become a problem. When people try and be perfect, they become obsessive and they want to do everything right, and they just can't. So, yeah, so part of that is a bit of humility, saying, okay, well, I have to be humble and realize that, I have some issues to deal with. So when it comes down to society, it's more difficult because it's kind of an impersonal thing. Um, not many of us have met the leaders of our society, right? How many of your listeners have actually, or viewers have actually met the president, the governor? I think in my life I've met, well, I must admit I did meet the Prime Minister of Canada at one point. Just shook his hand and made a couple of comments at one of his outings, right? So, hey, what can you do? But there's no chance of getting up to that level in society, right? So for the majority of us. So it's hard to handle it. And how do we do that? It's a sense of saying, well, we have to somehow interact with society at an upper level in a way that we can accept our own role there. So some of us feel insignificant, unimportant, and that's a problem because when we feel that way, then we react from an emotion. Emotion builds up, and then people can do angry things when they feel like they're ignored, they're unimportant, they don't count. Well, that's not true. Everyone counts, but people are going to say no, they don't count. So that's going to cause an emotional reaction. And so it's better to handle it in ways that can become more productive, like joining some protests, taking part in peaceful protests, or in support groups, or in groups that can help get changes made, and running podcasts like you're doing. So that's great. Yeah.
Productive activities that are beneficial and positive as opposed to
Right.
emotional and destructive, because I feel like this idea that emotions don't think, our emotions. I'm going through a mentorship program, and one of the conversations just this week was, our emotions do lie to us. They can be informed by past experiences, traumas, wounds that we carry with us, that may be family dynamic stories that we've bought into. Like it's so multi-layered, isn't it? Which is what makes it a little more complicated, where this awareness piece that you're talking about is really the first step, isn't it? We have to kind of wake up to our own stuff, I suppose.
But the awareness has to come like on the spot, in the moment, in what we used to call the here and now. So yeah, as it's happening at that point, it's important to become aware of somebody else's emotion, our own emotion, make sure we handle them properly. And so it's a matter of thinking slowly as we're doing it, and talking slowly as we're interacting. When we talk more slowly, just giving a few extra seconds, literally seconds in our conversation, allows times for those constructive thoughts to come forth. And when we think constructively, then we're doing it in a more responsible, realistic way. So, but we're going to go fast and think quickly. We're going to react quickly. We can't think. There's no time to have those thoughts.
The pause can protect a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do we capture our emotions? What are a couple of things we can do? So slowing down is helpful. For me, I have questions that I ask myself, that help me. But what would you suggest?
Okay. Be aware of what's happening in your body. Not in a physical way, like not to say necessarily, you might say it, that your stomach hurts or your back hurts. That's kind of a pain in a specific place. But if it tends to happen often like that, then that could be an emotional part. But in other words, though, just get a sense of what are you feeling in your body? What's the emotion going through your body? An emotion kind of comes in a gentle way, in a place that you can't say, my particular body part hurts. It's more like a sense that you get in your body as you're feeling something, right? And you can listen to your voice and listen to others' voices. The emotions come out in the voices. So listen to other voices. That way you can get somebody else's emotion. And emotion can be implicit, and that's the problem. Not necessarily just explicit. Explicit are the obvious emotions when someone is crying or yelling or fighting or worried. But those are the obvious emotions. The implicit emotion is the one that doesn't show up in an obvious, overt way. Instead, it's there in your mind, in your body, but it comes out in your voice and in your gestures. And that emotion coming out from your voice, it hits the ears and goes into your subconscious in ways that you may not even be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think about passive aggressive people when you say that.
Yeah.
There's an intention there. And if you're not paying attention,
Yeah.
you can take on what they may be trying to put on you, as opposed to separating yourself from what somebody is saying to you and recognizing I'm a separate entity from this statement and this person. Do you know what I mean? That, I don't know if it's considered codependency, but when you, that's not the right word. And I know I'm not a psychologist, but it's when you emotionally merge with people. That's another level. That's a very deep level, I think, of you have to be aware that I emotionally merge with the people I'm with, right?
Yeah.
I think this whole emotional contagion in this time has really heightened that its success lies in people merging together without slowing down to think, is how I perceive.
That's a great way of describing it. That's good. Now, can you describe it a little bit more about what you mean by merging? Because that's very important. That's why I try and say in my book that you have to be aware when you're merging with someone, is that the person you want to merge with? And if this merging could go along from the point of different levels of people, you can merge with someone to the point that you want to become intimate with them. You can merge with someone to the point that you choose that person as your mate. You can merge with someone to the point that you want to work for that company. Or you can merge with someone to the point that you want to support them politically. And it can become an emotional thing. And that's okay, but you also have to have the mind involved here and say, well, is this the right person to merge with, to be with the rest of my life? Why are there so many divorces? People go with their emotions purely at the point that they're marrying. And and people leave companies because it doesn't turn out to be what it might look like at the beginning. So it's important to have the brain become aware. And one of the ways to do that is to realize that people will often repeat their behavior from the past. The best way to predict behavior is to look at how people have behaved in the past. And then you can sense, well, if this person has been gambling or drinking all their life, they're not going to stop because they're going to be in a relationship with you. It might slow down for a bit, but they're not going to stop it unless you can do something like join Gamblers Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous or something, get some professional help to deal with the habit. And then it might help, and then it might change. Yeah.
That's back to that personal responsibility, though, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The person has to want to make that change. If they say, no, this is crazy, this is, then they're not going to go for it. That's why so many marriages get into trouble.
Yeah. Back to the merging conversation, it's what we choose to listen to, read, the conversations, and the people that we have the conversations with. Like there are people I can have conversations with on difficult topics.
Right.
And it's okay because they've done the work to stay in a healthy space, you know?
Yeah.
And there's an empathy and there's a natural checks and balances in my healthier relationships, right? For example, if you and I were having a disagreement right now, a healthy version would be, I don't know if I agree with that. Let's talk about that a little bit, as opposed to, no, I don't agree with you. It's like these subtle ways of shifting, like you said, our body. Because I think if I feel tense and my shoulders rise and my fists clench, I respond in that physical state, don't I? It seems you're following that emotion through your body, through your voice. If you can catch it.
I'd recommend trying to say something like, no, you don't disagree with the person, you're disagreeing with their opinion. Right? So if someone likes red, someone likes blue, well, that's okay. We all have different preferences for different colors. But that doesn't mean you're disagreeing with the person, you're disagreeing with their favorite color. That's all it is, right? So otherwise you can say, oh, you're crazy, this, that, and the other, and it becomes a personal thing. And it's not supposed to be a personal thing. We all have differences.
Now, there's something we've been pressured to eliminate is differences. It's like a pressure to all move in a similar direction. And I feel my personality rebels.
Oh, yeah. It's not possible. It's not possible. We're different as people.
And we need to be different. We need all of those differences.
Yeah, exactly. But to respect the differences in the other person and not to feel threatened or challenged by it. So that's part of the problem. People feel threatened or challenged because somebody else is different. But they're not different to the point of view that they're an alien, from another planet. That would be totally different. Okay. They have a lot of similarities too, because we're all human. We're all in this together. And so,
It's interesting how the psychological power of a movement sweeps through, and this idea that we tend toward being sheep if we're not careful. To stand on your own mind in a broader global situation takes strength and courage. For me, I chose not to jump in the ring because I can swing with the best of them when I'm passionate about something. I had conversations that were important with the people that were important in my life.
Okay, good.
But we have this challenge, don't we? To begin to think again. How do we shift, Bruce, away from, because we've been in an odd season of group emotion, as you put it. How can we shift ourselves back to a healthier, more objective, more balanced way of being after this heavy of an emotional contagion season?
The first step is to be aware that it's happening as it happens.
Okay.
So it's not group think, it's group feel, as you're saying, group emotion. Do you really want to go based on group feel? Group feel belongs in the stadiums when you're supporting your sports team. And that's where group feel belongs, right? And even then it can get carried away, as you see in some other countries. But it's important to be aware of this phenomenon and apply it at the time. It's not that crucial that you have to get out of control. It could be threatening to your life. There's been people who have been killed at concerts because of the crush of the emotion through the music. There are people who drive poorly, as we were saying earlier. And the emotions are right at the top of ourselves, that there doesn't take much to spill them over.
Yeah.
People I'm so impatient or so needy or so angry that it carries over and it doesn't take much to spill it over now. And so that's a problem. Now, I think this is important for people in their middle age too, because, when you're dealing with your adolescent children, that's the point they're becoming aware of this. And sometimes that can become an issue in families. So it's important to become aware of this too for all ages, but especially in young adults and middle-aged people and people who are seniors as well. And yeah, so that's all important.
And I think that it can make us feel hopeless.
Okay.
Emotional contagion can feel, you know what I mean? If it feels like the world, the sky is falling, right? The sky is falling, the sky is falling. If that's all we hear, it tugs at our emotional strings and it can create a hopelessness. And I think that idea that you keep presenting, which is become aware, pause. So you and I might have a similar understanding. What does it look like for someone to become aware? Like, what would happen in their mind to bring awareness if they're so used to merging with who's around them and merging with the information and their emotions are quickly swept?
Well, it's important to be aware of the context in which you're in, right? So looking around, just kind of distracting yourself for a minute, not to be rude to the other person or anything, but just to say there's more going on in this otherwise what you get is just what you see, and there's more to it than that.
So you and I keep using the term awareness, and while that may feel like it would be an obvious thing, I would like to ask you to share, like, what does awareness look like and what steps can someone take to build better awareness, especially when it comes to these emotionally charged things that we're talking about?
Yeah. What would you like from another person? And so how would you like another person to respond to you? And then ask yourself that question and then think the reverse. How are you responding to the other person? Is there a better way to respond, a way that would become more responsible to yourself and to that person? Right? And that will be a way to do that. And then say, what's going through my body and my mind that might stop me from doing that? So, and it can be hard at the actual time. So then you kind of, when the situation is over, you can kind of go through that and play a kind of a recording of that situation with yourself, and you can visualize that situations. And when you visualize it, you see, well, what was the room like? What were people wearing? What were they saying? And what was I feeling at the time? What was running through my mind? What was I feeling inside myself? And how could I have done it differently? How could I have done it differently? You can even prepare for situations, knowing if you're going to have a certain situation. I often use this example, and it's always remarkable to me how all the sports teams out there, and as we come to the Super Bowl coming up, we know that the teams are practicing, preparing to play in the game. We know in theaters and movies and performances that people will practice before they go out perform. So then why don't we do that in real life as well? Anticipate what's going to happen. How can we handle it better as we have a dinner coming up with someone, if we have a meeting with someone, if we're going to take part in some kind of a situation that could be tense? Well, let's prepare for that. How can we do that? What would be the best thing to say, best thing to feel? How can we go through that? And so, and you, at the time, if you're doing it, preparing ahead of time in acting, the actors will get a sense of their feeling inside themselves. If someone says something, what do they feel at the time? What's their emotion? And so you can prepare that and become aware of it. As you're saying now, you might ask yourself, does this particular feeling I have in my body indicate I have a certain emotion? It might. It might ask someone else, well, how are you coming across? Or videotape yourself, or how do you come across? These are all ways of becoming more aware of your feelings inside yourself as you're showing something.
It's really interesting. We are naturally inclined to defend ourselves and our ways of being and why we say things. And, you mentioned humility earlier, and it is a humble process, but there's a peace that comes along with it as you gain more emotional stability in your own life, the ability to quicker and quicker, because perfection, you're right, is not an option, but to capture our emotions quicker. And, I was wondering if you prescribe like breathing techniques or maybe a physical move like squeezing a finger or something in the middle of an emotional thing, if we could give ourselves a reminder, is what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. So you can take a deep breath and slowly exhale. And you can learn how to do that. So you do that in the middle of the situation so no one else is aware of it. That would be a moderately deep breath. For example, if I were to sit back now and go, I feel more relaxed, but our conversation is being disrupted, and the other person is probably not too happy with that. So if I do that in a way that's not so noticeable, somebody else might not notice it. I'm taking a mildly deep breath now, and it helps me feel a bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's important to do that. Yeah. Yeah. Pinching yourself. Well,
I don't mean pinching. I mean like just like maybe rubbing your hand or rubbing your arm, almost like a self-soothing if I'm feeling upset, finding a way to, I don't know, comfort or soothe myself in that moment, because sometimes it's so visceral, isn't it? Emotions are such a visceral thing. We don't have time. They move so fast.
Self-soothing is certainly a good way to do it. And by touching yourself in a gentle way, that's a better way to do that. Otherwise, people are probably using some substances. And that's not the best way to do that. But you're right. It's good to do that kind of thing. Self-soothing is certainly an important role that we can do to ourselves. We deserve it. We deserve it. So, and that would include things like taking a deep breath, having a healthy drink, like a drink of water. It also allows us a couple of seconds to think things through and help our body realize that we can interact in a way that can become more relaxing, more responsible. So if people are in fast mode, they don't have time to think. And then they don't know what they're doing, and it gets out of control. And whenever we see something bad happening in the news, that's usually what happens. They're out of control, and they're rushed, they're hurried, they don't think because there's no time to think. It's quick. They have just small, quick thoughts. And that's but slowing down is certainly a good way to realize now, is there a way for me to handle something a little bit better? It doesn't mean you're to blame or at fault, because we're not perfect, but maybe I can handle it just a bit better. And so I can come across in a more relaxed, responsible way to people.
It's a little bit of a journey because every situation is different, right?
Yeah.
The better we understand ourselves, I feel like, for example, for me, I recognize that my temper, my anger, was a secondary emotion, and that the anger was coming from something before it.
Right.
So if I'm angry, I try to turn and look at the situation and go, okay, what happened before? It's like, what was the match that lit the fire?
Yeah. Yeah. And what's the thought that goes through your mind that produces the anger too?
Yes.
It's a very quick thing, because there's the event and then there's the emotion, but there's a quick thought in between somewhere. And that can be helpful.
It's like a decision, right? Like, this makes me angry, or if he says this, or if that person does that. It's like sometimes we set ourselves up for that emotional contagion by deciding in advance that we're going to be upset when this happens. And a lot of the times we know that it's going to happen because we know the situation or we know the person. So now we have to switch to how can I buffer this and handle myself in a way that doesn't feel yucky afterwards, because for me, anger was just it just made me feel yucky. And emotional contagion often seems to be rooted in fear and anger. At least that's what it has seemed like to me. Am I correct?
So yeah, you are. Yeah, fear is so strong, and people have counter reactions to fear. So people are afraid of being taken over or being dominated. And so they quickly react in a strong way to prevent that from happening, because it's a fear, and that may not happen in the first place. So and we see a lot of fear going on. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that certainly is a very strong emotion, one of the strongest ones there is. I forget who it was who said there's nothing to be afraid of about fear other than fear itself. And that's 100% correct. Yes, yes.
That's a strong merging emotion too, isn't it? It's like that's where the contagion comes in.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes emotional infection, and that emotion infects your thinking, and the fear takes over. But as Jimmy Pearsall said, fear strikes out, right? And the old baseball player from decades ago.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's the way to go. Yeah. Fear should be reasonable and relative. If I'm being chased by a tiger, I better start running. Okay. Or a better analogy is, if I'm being chased by a lion, I better start running, unless you're a lion tamer. And then you stop and you turn around and you tame that lion, because you get along with the lion. The lion trusts you, you trust it. So fear produces distrust and anger as a defense. And so then you see that in politics. Each political party is afraid of the other. So they become so angry because that's a natural kind of instinctive reaction. What's there to be afraid of? More taxes, less taxes? Okay, but it's not as crucial as a tiger coming after you. And if you start to think, well, maybe it is, then that's your emotion taking over your brain. Because, nothing really bad is going to happen in the way of taxes.
It's you keep mentioning the brain, and I think it's helpful to understand how the emotions impact our brains. It's really it's a neuroscience conversation. Yes. When we start talking about emotional contagion, because things are switching on and off in our brain. And when I am in a heightened emotional state, I am disabling certain parts of my brain unless I can stay or get back to a place of balance in that emotion. Like if the emotion is in the front of the train, my brain is not doing what it needs to do to help me make good decisions. And I feel like there's this last global experience has put a lot of brains offline. And I don't mean that like they're stupid. I'm talking about actual neuroscience where the fear and it has completely kind of blocked a lot of people from being able to be aware.
Yes. It has, for sure. And so I say in my book that negative emotional contagion is one of the major factors in life, as it's caused millions of deaths in the wars that we have seen in our lifetime and in history. Positive emotional contagion is one of the most powerful positive forces in life, because it brings love to each other. Okay. In fact, it's probably helped us survive as a species, because when you think of it, babies, when they're born, need mothering right away. But the babies can't talk yet. So how do they communicate to their mother? Well, they cry. And they show it in their voice right away. And the mothers pick that up. They've given birth. And the love kind of comes right away. And so it's emotional contagion in positive ways come from, from birth. And then that helps the human race survive, because if mothers didn't hug their babies, they wouldn't get nurtured, and we need that nurturing, or they would die, and then we wouldn't exist as a human race. So certainly there's other factors involved, and so there's certainly they need the nutrition and all the other things that they need in a healthy way. It's not all or nothing, either or. People think emotionally. They tend to think, they reduce it to a reductio ad absurdum. They reduce it to an absurd thing. Well, you mean that love is all there is? You don't need food? No, I'm not saying that. Of course you need food. You need oxygen. You need warmth. You need all these good things. So it's all important, but love is so crucial, right? And so, yeah.
And the kind of love that takes other people into consideration, not just this emotional, touchy-feely Hollywood version, right? We're talking about the kind of love that is symbiotic, that benefits everyone.
Yeah, where you join with that person, not in a physical way, but the merging, as you said earlier, happens. And so you can feel this mutual respect going on in a way that becomes stronger. That's where empathy and compassion all come into play, and putting yourself into the shoes of the other person so you know how they feel, and in a general sense, is an important way too. And so that's also important to do that. Yeah.
So, Bruce, if you were to anchor this conversation with three things, what three gifts would you give to the listeners around this conversation of emotions don't think and emotional contagion? And what would you say to them? What three things do you want them to remember or take away?
Okay. It's interesting you're choosing three, because that's something, and a number that most of us choose to say something, that's important. It's a baseball term, because, if 3 outs in an inning, 3 strikes in whatever. Yeah. So
it's an easy number. It's not too many. It's not too little.
No. But you notice what I'm doing here by doing that, I'm buying myself some time so I can kind of think of what those three things are. So, and that's a way that you can stop yourself from being a little bit different and crazy about something. And so, yeah, well, and three things that are important. Well, it's so important that we have to be aware of the strong impact of emotion. For some reason, politicians and the press and the media think of emotions as a mild thing, an irrelevant thing, as kind of a secondary thing. In my mind, it's the most important, critical thing, because emotions drive behavior. Number one, emotions drive behavior. So be aware of that. And number two is to have helpful, correct thoughts that will help you regulate and manage the emotions so that you don't get carried away. So, and the third thing is to recognize the emotions in others as they're saying that, even implicit emotions that comes through the voice. So, and when you do that, then you can give yourself a few seconds to manage your own emotions so that, it is within reason that you can regulate that. And regulating your emotions is so important. That way it doesn't get carried away. So, and if we did that, then you wouldn't see all the turmoil that we're getting out there, because we read about turmoil, but nowhere do we read that the emotions cause the turmoil. Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Without identifying the cause of it, you can't deal with it.
Yeah. Right. In other words, if you can't see it, you can't find it, right? Like, if it doesn't exist in your mind, your awareness, it's impossible to do anything about it.
Yeah. But of course, emotions are invisible, so you can't see it. But you certainly feel it, right?
But the results of them are there.
Yeah, exactly. And realizing that emotions don't think tells you, hey, you got to be able to think. That's what counts here.
Yeah. So, Dr. Bruce, how can people get a hold of you and get a hold of your book?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. My email address is bjhutch, bjhutch, at rogers.com. I'm up here in Canada, in Ottawa. Rogers does not have a D in it, Rogers. And my book is on sale on Amazon. And Emotions Don't Think by Bruce Hutchison. My name is not Hutchinson. I don't have a chin. I'll have to cover my chin over so you know how to spell my name. Okay, so yeah, that's how it's available on Amazon, and you can also order it from the publisher Crossfield and here in Canada, and it's also available through Barnes and Noble and Chapters in Canada and other places as well. Okay,
awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bruce. I want to thank you for coming on the show and for taking the time to talk about this very important topic. Thank you for taking the time to write a book about it, because you can speak to me and you can speak to someone else, but when you write a book, you can impact so many more lives. And I really appreciate you taking the time to serve the global community by writing this book.
Okay. Thank you, Gina. And I hope that people can read it. And if they have any more questions, I have a website, brewhut.com. The first three letters of both of my names, brew and hut.com. Where I have a number of posts about emotional contagion and time of turmoil that we're living in. And so that can be very important to help as well. And you can also go to that website and order the book through that website. If you wanted to do that, there's a place to do that there. It takes you to Amazon. So, yeah. Okay, so thanks for inviting me, Gina. It's been very interesting and very good.
Thank you. Well, friends, today I've been talking to Dr. Bruce Hutchison. He is a retired clinical psychologist and the author of Emotions Don't Think, Emotional Contagion in a Time of Turmoil. If you're finding us on YouTube, just look down below. I will have links to Bruce and his email and everything there. If you're on a podcast platform, you can head on over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 321, and I will have links to Bruce there. Friends, this is such a timely conversation. It's such an important conversation. It matters in our families, in our friendships, in our jobs, in our communities, and in our world. If we can find that place of awareness and improve our emotional intelligence and keep our brains online when we're having these difficult conversations, think how much more balanced and healthy our world would be. So don't feel insignificant in the world in these times, because every rock that lands in water creates a ripple. And every time you and I live up to our greatest potential, closest to our greatest potential, we put a ripple out into the world, and it does make a difference. So please take the time to consider getting a hold of this book, sharing this conversation with people. Let's start a good, healthy conversation around the fact that we have a choice in how we feel and how we respond in every situation. Thank you so much for joining us today, my friends. I hope this has been beneficial to you. I hope it has encouraged you. I would encourage you also to subscribe, rate, and share this conversation. Don't forget to come back next week. I will be bringing more inspirational people, topics, and conversations in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.